in terms of the people we were removing. And it is absolutely
So the defence of the Home Secretary is an ambition, not a target?
Well, actually, there's a big difference between the two things.
Amber Rudd has been told by Downing Street to resist pressure to resign. Now, political opponents will say that's because she's being used to protect her predecessor at the Home Office, none other than the Prime Minister herself. But there could be another reason, because every week in there, an inner group of Cabinet Ministers meet to thrash out the policy on Brexit. And if Amber Rudd goes, well, the balance of forces between those who voted to leave the EU and those who, like her, voted to remain could be disrupted at a potentially crucial time. So far, Amber Rudd may be using up as many political lives as this creature. Number 10 don't want to show her the door, but tomorrow the Home Secretary will have to convince MPs that she's on top of her job.
And Ian is with me now. Yes, as you say there at the end of your report, Amber Rudd is answering questions from MPs tomorrow. Is she going to face another week like this one, and is her position safe?
Well, potentially she could face quite a difficult week. First of all, she's got to speak to MPs, as you say, tomorrow. And also, we saw there that she gave evidence to this cross-party Home Affairs Select Committee. The chair of that, Yvette Cooper, said she wants to recall her to that committee to question her again on the evidence that she gave. So the pressure will remain. And I think it does become slightly difficult to sustain if you're Secretary of State, when you have to go back to committees and to Parliament the whole time, clarifying what you'd previously said. But certainly I think from Downing Street's point of view, she has their confidence. They want her to continue. They think she's doing vital work. And I think they believe that she can ride out this storm, although it is becoming quite a big storm for her to ride out. I think she'll get lots of questions about what she knew, when she knew it, from MPs tomorrow. But as far as I'm aware, what she's likely to do, to some extent, is take the line that defence is, or attack's the best form of defence, I should say. To defend herself, she'll go on the front foot and say, OK, if you stand back from all this discussion about targets or ambitions, this is really about illegal immigrants. This is not about the Windrush generation. She's apologised for that. She's trying to sort that out. This is about illegal immigration, and she is right, she will say, to try to increase the number of removals.
And on the Windrush generation and that letter signed by 200 MPs, led by David Lammy, you know, what traction is there? Would the government be receptive to putting these promises into law?
I think the reason David Lammy and 200 other MPs from all parties, although I think only one Conservative signed, but it's a broad range of MPs, they basically say, look, you need reassurance if you're in that generation that's been affected. That's why you need to put things in law. But also, beyond reassurance, they're saying, look, there is also a problem that people might actually enforce immigration restrictions. They might actually begin the process of deportation unless they are told in law to stop that against people who are in that particular category. What the government's saying is they do not believe that they need to change the main thrust of legislation, primary legislation as they call it, in order to deliver on Amber Rudd's promises to that generation. What they're saying is they may have to change policy guidance, though, to ensure that people who are here and haven't perhaps been able yet to prove their legal status won't actually be removed.
Alongside the migration row, there are also stories about Amber Rudd being linked to certain proposals on keeping the UK in some form of customs union. How are these two issues linked in terms of her future?
I think they're linked in one sense. Basically what's happening now is that every single week from now on, the inner core of the Cabinet, the Brexit subcommittee, is meeting to thrash out any differences on the policy to withdraw from the European Union, some of the detail, and some of that either hasn't been settled internally, or some of the things which have been settled internally aren't being acceptable to Brussels. So we're at a crucial time. We're trying to get these trade talks. We're trying to get a final deal before the end of the year. And I think that what the Prime Minister certainly likes to see is a balance of views on that in the committee. And Amber Rudd, as you know, was one of the leading campaigners to remain in the EU. If she were to leave, if she were to resign, it would be quite difficult to get someone else of her status into that committee very quickly. Some of the discussions they're having are on issues such as labour mobility, for example, where Amber Rudd wants to see that remaining as flexible as possible. That might also be a view closer to the Prime Minister's than, say, the Foreign Secretaries. So she'll want that range of views there on these important subjects. I think the Customs Union is due to come up this week, for example. So if Amber Rudd had to go before that, she'd be missing from a very crucial debate inside the government and inside the Conservative Party in the future of the Customs Union and what might replace it when we leave.
OK, Ian, thank you very much for that. Ian Watson. North Korea says it will close its nuclear test site within weeks and wants US weapons inspectors to verify the shutdown. The news follows the historic meeting between the leaders of North and South Korea on Friday. The new US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, says Washington has an obligation to pursue peace as preparations continue for a possible meeting between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. From the South Korean capital, Seoul, Laura Bicker reports.
From this momentous show of unity comes an apparent display of sincerity. President Moon is making his conversation with Kim Jong-un public, and it seems the North Korean leader is willing to go further than simply stepping over the border. He has pledged to close an atomic test site, something his father did before him. This was the Yongbyon cooling tower being blown up in 2008, but still North Korea continued to build weapons in secret. This time the promise is to close the Punggye test site. The last 6 nuclear tests were carried out here. It's been slightly damaged, but Kim Jong-un says it still works, and he's prepared to close it while experts and the media watch.
They are masters of propaganda. Now it's time to put aside the emotions and collect ourselves and concentrate on the key consideration, which is dismantling of North Korea's nuclear weapons.
But the South Korean government believes its relationship with the North has to start somewhere.
Trust is two-directional. Okay? You build the trust in the process of implementing agreements.
Kim Jong-un is also turning back time. Literally. In 2015, he changed Pyongyang's clocks, and since then they've been half an hour behind Seoul. Korea will become one time zone once again. And it does seem that some in the South are reassessing their view of Kim Jong-un.
I used to think of North Korea negatively, but now little by little, I realize we are one people, and I'm touched by it.
This time, Kim Jong-un speaks with conviction. I think that's why this time will be different.
Kim Jong-un seems to be saying all the right things, and changing the clocks is a good sign of unity. He's also said through the South Koreans that his missiles pose no threat to the US or to them. But it kind of misses the point. The US doesn't want him to have those weapons in the first place.
South Koreans have to wait and see if the US president can do a deal on denuclearization. History has taught them to be wary of the North, but there's hope here that this could be the start of a new era. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Seoul.
Some breaking news coming into us from Northern Ireland, where the police service of Northern Ireland say they have discovered a viable explosive device during a search of a house in Strabane in County Tyrone. They say they've also arrested 3 men. 10 houses had to be evacuated during a security alert after the discovery of this viable explosive device in the Drumralla area of the town. Army technical officers made the device safe, and it was taken away for further examination. 3 men aged 43, 45 and 47 were arrested and have been taken into custody for questioning. Meanwhile, 2 men wanted by police in Northern Ireland have been found tied to a bench and covered in paint in a suspected vigilante attack in County Armagh. James White and Alexis Gesto were wanted for offences including breach of licence. Images of the pair had been shared on social media. Our correspondent in Belfast, John Campbell, is following the story.
Well, the Police Public Protection Branch had issued an appeal for information about these 2 men. They'd released their pictures. They'd also given details of a car which was seen in the South Armagh area. Now, South Armagh is a particularly closely knit rural community. Last night, police were called there to the village of Mullabawn, and they found these 2 men tied to the bench, their hands bound with cable ties and paint poured over their heads in what was apparently a vigilante attack. Now, a local councillor says that this incident was unfortunate but understandable given that tensions have been running high in the area. The police say it's completely unacceptable. The 2 men had to be treated in hospital and they're now investigating an assault.
John Campbell. An 18-year-old man has been arrested after 4 people were taken to hospital, 2 of them with potentially life-changing injuries following a collision in Newport. A police cordon was set up in the city centre after the incident at about 5:30 this morning. A car was found burned out in a nearby street a short time afterwards. Our correspondent Nicola Smith has more.
Well, this is a really busy part of Newport city centre, and this road behind me is lined with bars and nightclubs. So in the early hours of any Saturday or Sunday morning, you can imagine that it is lined with people out socialising, and that was the scene in the early hours of this morning, where at around 5:30 emergency services were called to report that a car had driven through a group of pedestrians. 4 people were injured, 3 women and 1 man, and we understand that 2 of the women have received potentially life-changing injuries. As you can imagine, eyewitnesses say that it was a pretty busy scene here, with plenty of emergency services vehicles trying to help out people involved. Now, police have sent specialist crime teams to the scene. The crime scene officers have been here this morning, sorting through the debris that has been left behind. But officers are very keen to point out that they do not believe that this incident is terror-related, and they have arrested an 18-year-old man from Newport on suspicion of causing injury by dangerous driving. They say investigations are ongoing.
Nicola Smith reporting. Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh have been appealing to visiting UN ambassadors to help them return safely home. A delegation from the UN Security Council is visiting refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, which is home to nearly 700,000 Rohingyas who fled violence in Myanmar. Their tour comes amid warnings that the coming monsoon season could worsen conditions in the camps. Nick Beek reports.
A break from the misery of life in the biggest refugee camp in the world. Hundreds of Rohingya people gathered to greet the UN delegation. Ambassadors from 15 countries had come to Cox's Bazar to see their suffering and hear their harrowing stories.
We are standing here to demand justice, as the Myanmar military have killed our men and tortured our women.
This is what she's talking about. The Burmese military and Buddhist mobs torched Rohingya villages last year and forced nearly 700,000 Muslims to flee for their lives. It's not known how many exactly were murdered before they could escape. Now in camps across the border in Bangladesh, the survivors have placards, but not much else. The Security Council says it wants to help the authorities here prepare for the imminent monsoon season and try to find a way for refugees to return safely to Myanmar, if indeed any want to.
It is worth recalling that the Rohingya came from Myanmar, and the solution must lie in Myanmar. They must be allowed to go home in conditions of safety. It may take some time, but we would like to hear from the government of Myanmar how it wishes to work with the international community, and we will do everything we can as the Security Council to support progress and trying to come together to take decisions that help the Rohingya.
Tomorrow, the delegation will leave Bangladesh and fly to Myanmar to meet de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi. She's been widely criticised for not doing more to protect the Rohingya. The Burmese army has always claimed it didn't target these people, but was rooting out terrorists. But many believe this is the face of a crime against humanity. Nick Beek, BBC News, Yangon.
6:17, the headlines now on BBC News. Labour's David Lammy leads 200 MPs who've signed a letter calling for government promises to Windrush migrants to be written into law. Kim Jong-un promises to close North Korea's nuclear test site next month and invites the world to watch, according to the South. Police in Northern Ireland have taken 2 wanted men back into custody after they were found tied up on a bench in County Armagh. Back to our top story now, and more than 200 MPs have written to Theresa May calling for the assurances given to the Windrush generation about their citizenship to be made law. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, is due to make a statement to Parliament tomorrow to respond to what she called legitimate questions about illegal migration. Earlier, the Labour MP who coordinated the letter, David Lammy, spoke to BBC News and was asked if he thought the Home Secretary should resign.
if you look at your reports and the huge